Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. We've seen so many instances of Sharia law gone wrong. What would Sharia law look like if it was done right? Dr. Jasser Auda is a professor of Sharia at the Qatar Foundation and the head of training at the International Union of Muslim Scholars. He will apply the principles of Maqasid, and he'll explain what that is, to show how Sharia law can transform society for the better. Dr. Jasser, it's so nice to have you back on the show.
I'm glad to be back.
Now, last time we talked about the Sharia, and it was such a broad topic that I felt like we didn't get to go into the nitty-gritty details, so I thought we could do that now. We mentioned some principles of Sharia law, and I was wondering if you can get into the details about how that can be actually applied to real-life examples.
We can differentiate in real-life examples between applying the principles of the Sharia to the society and applying them to the individual. We talked a lot about individual applications and all that. To apply these principles to the society is to take them as a philosophy for the public order of the society and as a basis for policy making and education and the approach of all of the social issues in a society. Every policy has a philosophy behind it, and usually policy making, for example, to focus on the area of policy making in this world is mostly done by considering the economic dimension of the decisions and having economic objectives from policy. Economic objectives are good, but as we mentioned in the principles of the Sharia, they come at the end of the objectives, after the objective of life and intellect and family and dignity and all of that. So with policy making, when we look at the prioritization of either choosing policy areas to focus on or in making policies themselves, we have to give priority to matters of life and dignity. And this is how the Sharia today, or the Islamic way of life today, could contribute to public debate, not only in Muslim majority societies, but also in the West, where we Muslims in the West, we could advise people to make policy based on more human considerations, the considerations of life and dignity and honor. And this is one application of the Maqasid, or the principles of the Sharia. Another application is in education. When we educate children, we educate them certain principles. Mm-hmm. And these are the principles that are the backbone of an educational philosophy in Islam. In this science, people often go by the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all of that, and this is intertwined with educational philosophies. In Islam, the hierarchy of necessities and needs, I would claim, and I wrote about that, is actually much more sophisticated than the Maslow's hierarchy, and much more comprehensive than the human rights theories and the development theories that we have in this area. And I think that as Muslims we have a duty to take these principles and activate them in order to make these educational policies and educational agendas and plans. Also in the area of ethics, when we talk about today's world, we are talking about economics and business and education and media and arts and every one of these sciences should have an ethics. In order to come up with an Islamic ethics approach to these different areas of life, today's contemporary life, we need to activate, we need to build on the Maqasid, or the principles of Islamic law, in order for them not to be just about the law and the rules, but to also be about everything we do in life on a professional level that has implications on people's lives.
Mm-hmm. So who would be involved in deciding what the Maqasid is and how to apply it then?
Well, Maqasid is a science by itself, mm-hmm. is a knowledge. We teach it. I teach in the College of Islamic Studies an introduction to Maqasid Sharia in a whole course. So this is a science.
But you wouldn't expect average Muslims to know, what the goals and purposes of Islamic law are.
Actually, I'm a bit disappointed that average Muslims don't know.
Okay.
Some people come and write a graduate thesis with me after studying Sharia for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And they don't even know what Maqasid al-Sharia or the principles of the Sharia are after studying Sharia for 5 years. Average
But I
Muslims.
mean, average Muslims might know what it is, but they might not know how to apply it in a particular case.
But I think that is the shift that the Islamic public discourse should take in the next while. And that's one of the things that, through writings and talking about, trying to achieve, that the Islamic discourse is focused on issues of literalism, issues that are marginal, that are less prior, that are related to minor objectives in Islam. Our public Islamic discourse is usually about details of prayer. So, where to raise your hand and where to put this and how many times you should do that, and the issues of, halal industry and halal food and all of that, and the issues of entertainment and music. And some of these issues are related to what's forbidden and what's lawful in Islam. But all of these issues are minor issues. We should shift the Islamic discourse into the major issues, the life of human beings on this earth. What relates to the public health, what relates to faith, before that, what relates to there is no God but one and Muhammad is his messenger. We don't focus on that too much. And especially with people who are not Muslim. Many people, I lived in Canada in the past, so many Canadians don't even know what Islam is about. And it's not enough for them to see something in the news. And they are not aware of what Islam is. And we should explain Islam via these principles, not via any issue that is political, whether we are right or wrong, or any issue that has to do with what we eat or what we wear. These are small issues in Islam. The major issues in Islam is the hierarchy of principles upon which an Islamic society is supposed to be based, and an Islamic individual is supposed to be active. And we should have this shift in the Islamic agenda to be less Islamic, to be less concerned with Muslims and their issues of places for wudu and places for prayers. And we can pray anywhere. The Prophet said the whole earth is a masjid, is a mosque. But we need to focus more on issues that relate to society.
So let's say there's an Islamic society that uses the principles that you've established, or well, you haven't established, but you've mentioned here. I mean, there are other scholars who have said the same. How would it be different from a Western society? What are the differentiating factors? Well,
sure. I was involved once with a committee with the Organization of Islamic Conference. We were trying to make something that talks about the Islamicity of the state. Something like a Sharia compliant states in the OIC, in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And we decided, we were a committee of about 40 scholars. We decided at the end that the principles of the Sharia are the means of measuring how Islamic a state is. The problem is that when we applied these principles in real polls, and so it was a big project, we realized that some states in Europe and North America
are more Islamic,
more Islamic than some traditional states that claim to be the guardians of Islam. Yes, the preservation of faith is one of the objectives of Islam, which I guess, I don't know, Sweden or Canada, whatever, might not score that high about from an Islamic perspective. But the preservation of life, the preservation of dignity, the preservation of wealth, the other issues of justice and mercy and wisdom and public good are things that they would score very high about. And that is a big dilemma that a Muslim lives in these days, looking at states that are majority non-Muslims, but they establish Islamic principles, and that's why they are doing well. Better than states that are majority and sometimes 100% Muslims who are not going by the Islamic principles. I remember Ibn Taymiyyah in one of his fatwa, he said Allah establishes a state based on justice, even if it's a state of disbelievers. And he does not establish a state based on injustice, even if it's a state of Muslims. He said because Allah made justice as نظام كل شيء, a universal law, he says. And whoever follows these principles, then they are Islamic. And that's why
So then is the difference between Islamic principles and so-called Western principles just that there's a moral motivation for Muslims to achieve those principles?
I think this dichotomy by itself is a false dichotomy.
Okay.
I think there is a great deal of overlap between what we could call Islamic principles and what we could call Western principles. And yes, there are differences, but the differences are not in the majority of the principles. It's like two circles that are overlapping. Yes, there are differences between the two circles, but most of the two areas are overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the case of most of the dichotomies that we deal with in our Islamic discourses. I think as Muslims we need to fix this dichotomous thinking about issues. Muhammad Abdu, one of the great scholars of Islam, of Al-Azhar in the 19th, early 20th century, when he went to France and came back, they asked him, what did you see? He said, I saw Islam, but without Muslims. And then I came back to Egypt, I saw Muslims without Islam. And I think there is a lot of truth in this, that this dichotomy between that if it's France, then it is non-Islamic, that is something that is something we need to get rid of.
So these principles that you're talking about, they're not new principles. I think we alluded to that earlier. They're not new principles. They've been discussed by scholars in the past. Mm-hmm. So what's different now? I mean, you're talking about Maqasid, you're talking about principles. What's new now in terms of their application?
What's new now is the application of them in real life.
So they haven't been applied in the past?
They haven't been applied in Muslim communities and Muslim societies in general. We need to apply our principles in order to show the world what Islam is about on a societal level. Mm-hmm. And what is new is also new interpretations. For example, the principle of life in the past had to do with protecting people from killing and the punishment for murderers and all of that. Now it's much wider than that. Life today is about public health and the environment, and about justice in all of its forms and so on. So today we need to reinterpret these principles in order to understand them in a modern context. We also, what is new as well is that today we need to differentiate between the fixed matters and the variable matters in Islam. Fixed matters in Islam, they call them ta'abbudiyat, or matters of worship. The matters of worship as in defining sins, and defining the structure of family, and defining prayers and fasting and charity and all of it. These are fixed matters in Islam. These are acts of worship that are fixed. Everything other than that is variable, is subject to development and evolution and all of that, but we should not evolve the way we view morals or morality, the way we define what is lawful and what is forbidden in Islam, because this is also an integral part of Islam, not just the principles. Mm-hmm. Some people take the principles too far and think about Islam only in terms of principles, and it doesn't become Islam anymore, because Islam has an element of literalism too, about worshiping God, in which I give up my mind when I stand and pray, mm-hmm. as Muhammad prayed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and bow exactly as he bowed, and give charity exactly as he gave, because I am realizing with this that my mind is limited, as my sight and my hearing is limited, and I am submitting to Allah by following the acts of worship that Islam is asking me to preserve. Other than the acts of worship, Islam is a very flexible and developing body of ideas that we should work on. But we should make sure that we have this core of acts of worship intact.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Jasser, we need another 2 hours to discuss this, but we don't have that. So thank you so much for your time and your insights. We really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for the good show.